Hello again and welcome to another Warhammer 40k Mordian Glory video. And today we're going to do something a little bit different. It's going to be a little bit of a musing on 10th edition and its current state, and a little bit of thoughts for the future of the game. As of recording this video, GW has just announced that there will be a balance patch coming out in a few days, this Thursday. So when you're watching this, my schedule on Tuesday, you have a couple of days to mull it over, and then we'll be able to look at what the results are on Thursday of this balance patch. Now, according to GW, this thing is going to not only adjust points, but also there's going to be changes to rules and stuff. Now, it's quite unusual for GW to announce this balance patch so close to it actually coming out. Normally what they do is they say, as they have done previously, oh, well, we're going to balance the game and we're going to patch it and it's going to come out at some point in September. And that's the last announcement we had. They said it's going to come out at some point, second week of September. And then one day it drops and there's a lot of excitement and it's all great because GW does this because they want there to be people talking about it and speculating and chatting and when will it come and what will it contain and all this kind of stuff. And normally the talk of a balance patch generates a lot of traffic for GW and 40k and all that kind of stuff. But it's interesting that they have given us a heads up it's coming this day on a Thursday. This is when it's going to happen. And this has come in the wake of the Nova Open results. So for those that don't know, Nova Open's quite a big tournament. And they've got an interesting system of working out who plays against who. It's not quite as simple as, oh, winners play winners, losers play losers, and we do this round after round until eventually we have someone that's won the most games. There's this whole sort of pod system, and it's quite interesting. And normally what the pod system does is it stops people from just getting smashed by all the best factions, and there's chances that certain pods will be a bit softer than others and so on and so forth. But unfortunately, the pod system was kind of overwhelmed this time by Eldar. And Eldar are so phenomenally broken. If you're a player right now playing Warhammer 40k, you will know that Eldar are a problem. And they're a huge problem. And this is kind of one of the things that I want to talk about today. We're talking about competitive 40k, we're talking about the state of the game, we're talking about where it's going to go. And all of these things that I mentioned now are feeding into kind of this brewing sentiment, this brewing thought in the Warhammer 40k community that 40k is on the edge of a precipice. We've had results from Nova where even this pod system couldn't stop the Eldar domination. They've absolutely destroyed everything in their path. And we've had results coming in for months and months now, since first tournaments of 10th edition, with certain factions absolutely dominating and certain factions completely and utterly being left in the dirt. It's quite bad. There is a big disparity between the top factions, the bottom factions. Whereas by the end of 9th edition, when really the competitive formula had been tweaked quite well in terms of getting the factions right and balancing them, you tended to have the top faction with about a 55% win rate. There were always an exception here and there, but about 55% win rate, and the bottom faction hovering about 40-45%, and everyone being kind of within 10 to 15% of each other. Of course, I'm massively generalizing then. There will be always exceptions that prove the rule, but there you go. But the point is that everyone's pretty close together. Now you've got examples where you've got the top faction, which is Eldar, and once you remove the mirror match, on average they're coming in with about a 70 to 75% win rate. And you've got the bottom factions, which after Nova is Space Marines, which is quite mind-boggling to me considering the hype that they had prior to the edition, the normal traditional dominance of Marines at the beginning of an edition. But this just goes to show how messed up 10th edition is. Marines are on like a 30% win rate, but they're not the only faction. Multiple weeks there are factions whose win rates begin with a 2. They've got 22%. I think Death Guard or Votan were the lowest recorded one with about 24% win rate, which is not ideal to say the least. And all of this, like I said, is brewing into a sentiment. It's brewing into a general feeling amongst the Warhammer community, especially the competitive one. But as we all know, the competitive community leads the casual scene, and what is broken in competitive will ever quicker in this age of the internet that we have now leak into casual scene and contaminate it all. And like I said, I keep talking about this sentiment, I keep talking about this general vibe, this feeling in the community. I keep hinting at it, but what is it? What is this precipice I talk about? There's a general consensus that if this balance patch on Thursday, 2 days from now, if it doesn't fix 40k, then 40k is going to be broken, and it's going to be the beginning of the death of 40k, which is incredible. Not in a good way, don't worry, I'm not celebrating the death of 40k. I love 40k, and despite the fact that a lot of you may think that I'm some sort of anti-GW salt miner, I'm not. When they do something good, I praise them, and if this balance patch comes out and it does even half of what it needs to do to fix the game, I will be on my knees, and I will be pleasuring GW, and I will be singing their praises. Okay, I genuinely am as level-minded as I can be. When they do something good, I praise them. When they do something bad, I lambast them. And that's the same I have for any company. Some of you may think I'm a bit of a Warlord Games shill. I'm not. When Warlord Games does something good, I praise them. When Warlord Games does something a bit not so good, or they don't have a particularly good release, or there's a particular model that might be a little bit dodgy, then I'll be like, oh, this wasn't a particularly good one. If you want to hear me say something negative about Warlord Games, I would say they really need to fix that British mortar sculpt, because it looks like the gunner has stared into the Ark of the Covenant, and it's been like that for several years. Anyway, the point is that if we don't fix 40k soon, it's going to kill it. And I have been here before. I have seen this happen before. In 6th and 7th edition, we had balance issues that were reminiscent of what we're seeing now. And these balance issues very quickly. Inside of, bear in mind, 6th and 7th edition was very close together. 7th edition is often described as 6.5 edition. These balance issues over the course of 3 or 4 years almost completely destroyed Games Workshop. They almost completely took the company out. There's no exaggeration. If 8th edition hadn't come along, the reason 8th edition was such a hard reset, harder than anything we've ever had before, such a hard reset, that it was done because they needed a Hail Mary, an absolute go for broke maneuver. And if the community hadn't accepted the ultra hard reset, we wouldn't have 40k now, 7 years later. So 7th edition has done this before, and so we've seen this game almost die before, and GW managed to pull it back by the skin of the teeth. The problem is that I think that 40k and tabletop wargaming and hobbying in general is in a very different place than it was back then. The industry has evolved unbelievably quickly. It has changed so rapidly. 5 years ago, 3D printers, and that is a whole different topic. Don't worry, I'm not getting into 3D printing, but I'll use it as an example now. 5 years ago, 3D printers were these really not very good things that you had to feed a filament wire into, and it would take forever. And eventually it would print you something that could vaguely resemble a dreadnought. It was a big box with 2 boxes sticking off it and 2 boxes for legs, and that was basically a dreadnought. And this all started happening beginning of 8th edition, which is about 5-6 years ago. And people kind of laughed at it, but the smart people, that didn't include me, I was wrong, I laughed. I said 3D printing, this is the best you can do, no one's gonna pay for this. But the smart people saw the potential and they jumped on it, and now look at where 3D printing is. You can 3D print models of GW quality or better for a fraction of the price. It is now cheaper to buy a 3D printer and the washing station and everything than it is to buy a 2,000 point Warhammer 40k army. That's how quickly things have changed. So why do I mention this? Why is it so important? Why am I so worried? I am very worried about 40k, because as much as I give this game shit, I love it. Okay, I live and breathe 40k, and I have sunk so much of my life into the game, and my livelihood is the game. Let's not beat around the bush here, guys. If 40k goes really squiffy, I don't know what's going to happen to me. I've gone full-time on YouTube. Maybe I go really squiffy, we don't know. But the point is that I'm worried about 40k. Moving aside the selfish reason, the business reason, all that kind of stuff, I'm worried about 40k because I really like the game and I want it to do well and I want it to succeed. And often a lot of my frustrations with Games Workshop come from being like, just bloody pull your finger out and do it right. But I'm really worried about it because this isn't 5 or 6 years ago. GW may have grown in huge popularity and is mainstream, and we've got South Park making episodes about it. And if South Park makes an episode about you, that's pretty mainstream. And if Henry Cavill agrees to do an Amazon Prime TV show with Warhammer, that's pretty bloody mainstream. And when you've got, everyone knows what Warhammer is now. A few years ago, people had never heard of it. Now it's pretty much mainstream. It's in the public eye. You have video games with little, that was it, Last of Us 2, which had a 40k board and just a little Easter egg there. There's all sorts of stuff going on. So the point is that it's very much grown and become very public, but as it has done this, a rising tide lifts all ships, and as 40k has become more popular, more mainstream, other companies have very much grown alongside this, and there are a lot of competitors to 40k now. Many of them are tiny. I often talk about Warlord Games, and I love the crap out of Warlord Games, but they are a company which is, I would say, like second well known behind GW, and this very well may be my own biased experience, but my own sort of only limited viewpoint, as it were. But I tend to find that a lot of people who give up 40k go to games like Bot Action. I often describe new players to Bot Action. Many of them are 40k refugees, GW refugees. Now, even though Warlord Games is a tiny fraction, they're relatively well known, and a lot of people know about Bot Action now. And there are other competitors out there as well, ones that can easily start picking up some of the slack. And so for GW, even though in many ways it seems like they're in a dominant position, they're actually more fragile than ever, because there are a lot of people that have the potential now to step forward and become the next GW. And even if that doesn't happen, if GW does manage to, if it just goes away and other companies don't pick up the slack, there are now people like One Page Rules, which are just entirely a ninth age, entire sort of community, or at least at their core community-based rule set that someone's sort of taken and run with it, and it's gaining more and more traction to the point where, they could easily take up the slack and take up the mantle from GW. So the point is that whilst GW is very big and everything's going really well for them, there are a lot of people nipping at their heels. And there's something that I've seen, this growing sentiment in this community, where if this balance patch doesn't fix 40k, people are out. They are done. I know so many people from a competitive scene who are not taking parts in tournaments right now because Eldar are so dominant and the balance is so out of whack. I know, so you go on any forum online and it is just a case of, I only really play 40k casually now, and I've started playing other game systems. I don't know if 10th edition was meant to be like this, but it feels like it's kind of, if this doesn't go off, it will have been the biggest own goal in GW history. This is reminiscent of, I think, was it 7th edition that almost killed Warhammer Fantasy, and they had to release 8th edition to try and save it, but it just didn't quite work. Too many people had already bailed. This is what it kind of feels like. So like at the beginning of this video, it's kind of a bit of a musing, a bit of a rambling on the state of 40k right now, and how I feel as a gamer and a tabletop player as well. I'm worried about it, and I think unfortunately for GW, this situation with the Eldar and the competitive game state and the meta of the game and the balance of the game and all that kind of stuff, there is a huge amount of expectation riding on it. Massive amount of expectation. If this is not seen as going hard enough, even if it produces quite good results, if it is not seen as going hard enough, then it will be perceived as being a failure. That's kind of the problem. That saying in Men in Black, a person is smart, but people are stupid, dumb, reactionary, scared, and they panic. And I think that if right now there's so much expectation riding on this, and if this fix doesn't go off, it will just give so much ammunition to people that in a weird way do want to see 40k fail, or it's going to cause a lot of people to have the perception of the game just not being balanced and there's no point really in playing it. Now what's interesting is, even though I would say a lot of people make up the casual side of the hobby, the new players and the hobbyists and the painters. And I've often said that if you want to get big in 40k and you want to do well, like doing a channel and everything, one of the things you should probably do is become a painting channel, because they seem to always be much bigger than the battle report channels, the tactics channels. But what's interesting is, even though the hobbying side is often seen as the bigger part, or is I should say the bigger part, the competitive scene and the gameplay scene, it's almost like the Achilles heel. It's a smaller part of the game, and yet it is the most vocal part of the game. It is the most visual part of the game. It's the part of the game that people follow the most. It's the part of the game that people talk about the most. 90% of conversations around 40k are going to be to do with balance, and are going to be to do with gameplay and talking about it. And, you know, why would I take this unit in a list, and what should I buy this unit? You know, even when people are just asking for like painting and hobbying advice, people will often say, oh, well, you probably don't want to buy that unit right now, it's not very good, or go ahead and buy it, but be aware it's probably going to sit on the shelf for a little bit. So even though it's a minority of the community, it's the bit that leads it. And it's why I always say the competitive scene leads the casual scene. And it's why when the balance of the game is so out of whack, it causes the other parts of the game to start bleeding and hemorrhaging, and it causes so many problems for Games Workshop. Some of the models that they released, I know I'm all over the place here, guys. Like I said, it's a bit of a ramble. There's a few sort of, it's a ramble with like golden nuggets kind of in there. That's kind of the vibe I'm going for. Some of the models that they released in 6th and 7th edition were absolutely gorgeous. You had the release of things, some of the biggest models we had that you could get before Super Heavies. You had things like Riptides, Wraith Knights, and you had factions getting overhauls, and you had all sorts of cool stuff coming out. Like, 6th and 10th edition saw the release of loads and loads of really, really good models. Models like that still hold up today. Really, really well. But the modeling side wasn't able to save Games Workshop. Hobbying side wasn't able to save it. It was the death of the competitive scene that almost caused the death of the company. And that's an interesting thing about Games Workshop, an interesting thing about 40k, and I think that's why so much is being piled, so much expectation is being piled on this balance patch. My perception is that if it doesn't fix it, and even if it does fix it, if it isn't seen as going so hard that generations yet unborn will talk about the fucking of the Eldar, a nerf bat to surpass Metal Gear, then the game is still going to end up withering and dying. It's going to be crazy. It's going to be interesting what happens. I really hope that this balance patch does enough. And at the very least, I hope it's perceived as doing enough. And if it does, then I am going to breathe a huge sigh of relief, and I'm going to be happy, and I'm going to look forward to playing more games of 40k, and I'm going to look forward to playing tournaments of 40k again. But if it doesn't, it's going to be one of those things where people are going to, around the world, reevaluate their relationship with 40k. Because the thing is, a couple of last little bits I want to mention here. Probably should have mentioned them earlier on, but a couple of last little bits I want to mention. Thing is, if GW wants to try again to hide behind the we're a model company, not a game company, that shit's not going to fly. That excuse didn't work back in the day. It's not going to work now. And the problem is, Games Workshop, is you don't make the best models anymore. People think you make the best models, but you don't make the best models anymore. There are a lot of companies out there that make models that equal or exceed the quality that GW puts out, and they do it for a tiny fraction of the price. So you can't hide behind that anymore, GW, because people, if they want good models, good sci-fi models, they'll go elsewhere. And therefore, kind of the thing that GW does better than any other company out there, and like I said, I'll give them some praise. The thing that they've managed to do very well is they've cultivated a very competitive community. Of course, of 8th and 9th edition, the game has got more and more competitive, more and more standardized, more and more homogenized in that case. Going to tournaments back in 6th edition was an absolute wild west. You'd turn up to one and there'd be custom rules. You'd turn up to another, there'd be a totally almost homebrew rule set. 9th edition and 10th edition, you go to a tournament. You can go to any tournament and you pretty much know exactly what you're going to get, what missions, what terrain layouts, all that kind of stuff, which is good and bad. It does make things a little bit stale after a while, but it's good for keeping things standardized and for making it accessible. So GW has kind of latched onto this competitive scene, and now they ride and die with it, because that's the one thing they do better than anyone else. I love bot action, but you cannot find a decent bot action tournament for love nor money. And I love 40k, and I can wake up on a Monday morning and go, you know what, I fancy going to a 40k tournament this weekend, and I can just Google it. I can type in Warhammer 40k tournaments, these dates, and dozens of pages will come up. Then you can go to Warhammer 40k tournament every weekend if you want to. And so this is why I think so much is riding on this balance patch. And this is why I think that if they don't get it right, it could kill the game. They have hitched their wagon to this horse, and that's why they need to make sure it works. But of course, all of this is just like my opinion. Like I said, this is just rambling thoughts, just something that's going through my head right now. It's a stream of consciousness. I'm just dumping stuff out onto the internet. But let me know what's going through your head. What's your current feeling on 40k? What do you think about this balance patch? Do you think it is make or break, or do you think GW will have plenty of opportunities to right the ship? Is GW too big to fail, or is that hubris? Let me know your thoughts down in that comment section, and if you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it. And if you want to see more of these rambling thoughts and general musings on the hobby, then please consider subscribing to never miss an episode. But before we go, I have just one last question to ask you. Would you like to know more? If so, then please consider becoming a channel member or patron. By supporting the channel, not only will you be doing your part, but you'll also be helping me create more content for your viewing pleasure and unlocking a whole host of perks. You get everything from a badge next to your name, custom emojis, but the big one is access to the Mordian Glory Discord server, an online community with almost 2,500 active members. It's always popping off in the MG Discord. We've got channels for army lists, hobbying, tactics, stories, and even a pretty spicy meme section as well. And joking aside, I do want to say a massive thank you to all of the current channel members and patrons. You guys are amazing. Truly the lifeblood of the channel. I could not do Mordian Glory full-time without the incredible and generous support of my members. So thank you guys so much. And last but certainly not least, I want to say a personal thank you to all of my top tier patrons. These are the War Masters, the people who have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty. So a massive thank you to Bombomvert, Ken Starr, Mark Panconi, RJ Scorpion, Swordfish Trombone, John Stubbs, Nick Walsh, Diesel Fox, and August Varney. Thank you guys from the bottom of my heart. You are incredible. Your generosity is truly humbling, and I could just say 1,000 times over and over again. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Hope you all enjoyed today's video. Thank you for watching, and of course, as always, I'll see you guys next time.